Bro, that shit took a minute to get this all set up. Let me see here. Put this down. Bro, that shit took a minute to get this all set up. Let me see here. Put this down. Bro, that shit took a minute to get this all set up. Come on in, everybody. Come on in. I'm a little bit late here, and it took a bit to get these technical issues resolved, but we're ready to rock and roll now. We'll wait another minute or two. Come on in, everybody.
We'll,
Go for it.
appreciate you guys.
Come on in. I'm a little bit late here, and it took a bit to get these technical issues. Come on in, everybody. Here we go. All right, let's get started. So we had a stunning and unprecedented act yesterday by the United States government to undertake what we're not really clear about at this point in time. I think there's a couple things we want to look at in this situation. First off, this appears to be just the Trump administration deciding that it's not about democracy, it's not about the drugs, it's not about the Venezuelan people. It is strictly about oil. I am almost surprised at how politically stupid and inept this entire effort is. By looking at this, they're falling right into the worst descriptions of colonialism that have been levied against America by our enemies, from time immemorial. And I think let's go through the chain of events today. So last night we had this military operation, which I think we can all agree was very well done. No reports of any serious casualties or deaths on the part of U.S. forces. There was a woman, at least one, that was killed by a medical condition with a bomb going off. That's inevitable when you use large munitions in an urban area. We've seen that Nicolas Maduro and his wife were detained and arrested. It was unclear what they were going to do with him, but he was being marched off the plane today by the Trump administration, by the DEA. So it looks like he will be prosecuted at this point in time. He does have a warrant out for his arrest. That warrant is several years old for drug trafficking and other offenses. So somewhat similar to Manuel Noriega. However, today we had this shocking press conference where the Trump administration told Machado, let's go back to who Machado is. She's the woman who in 2024 was supposed to be the candidate in the 2024 presidential election. However, she was not allowed to run, and so somebody basically standing in her place which is Edmundo Gonzalez Urrutia. Hope I'm saying that right. He was the registered presidential candidate for the opposition party. Marina Corina Machado was not allowed to run, but she has been at the forefront, the figurehead, really the symbolic leader of the opposition. She was spirited out of the country recently after winning a Nobel Peace Prize, basically snuck out. And, she had done everything in her power to really try to placate Trump and do what he wanted, to appear to be a leader that that Trump would help install in power and facilitate, that transition process, including going so far as to claim that Maduro interfered in the 2020 U.S. presidential election to help elect Joe Biden, which obviously I was very critical of because, that's you're selling out your credibility and it's not a good long-term plan. So she writes this long letter of hope this morning. You can see it. It was several paragraphs long, talking about, the future of Venezuela and the hopes for the people. On the stream last night, we talked about the devastation of the healthcare system, the institutions of that country under Maduro. And after writing that, we have this press conference, which is completely insane, where Trump says, well, she's a nice woman. However, I don't think she has any popular support, and I don't really think the people are going to get behind her. So she's nice, but we're going to move on. And I just think about that situation with respect to what that must have felt like. And it reminded me of Zelensky in the Oval Office. Now, that is the second leader of a noble democratic movement that Trump has really screwed over. And I think that that's very problematic, obviously. And what that must have felt like to just be cast aside. And we continue with this press conference. And Trump is, in fact, let's get to that. Let's go this way. But we get to this press conference, and it is clear that we're basically going to be putting troops on the ground to protect Donald Trump and his friends in their efforts to make money off of Venezuela with no clear path, no clear plan, no benchmarks, no timeline for a transition to democratic leadership. It is literally just going forward. There's Maduro right there being marched off the plane. Let's get to this. It is literally just going to be a situation where, here's the letter from Machado. It's just going to be a situation where there's apparently an occupation of the country by U.S. military forces. Not as in Iraq, it's worse than that. Not to transition the government, not with even the patina or the veneer of democracy in any way whatsoever. And it is to get paid. Okay, we're going to get into that in a second, because I've done a lot of cases where you're pursuing collections against someone after a judgment. And there are some minor court cases involving the oil situation there and disputes when Hugo Chavez nationalized the oil companies. But what you ended up having was, I'm sorry, I'm going through my timeline because it's a good reference point. So there's some funny memes like this one. Looks, come on, that shit is funny. Colonial Empire, looks like colonial empires are back in the menu, boys. Okay, so here's the press conference. This is what he said. I think it'd be very tough for her to be a leader. She doesn't have the support or respect within the country. She's a very nice woman, but she doesn't have the respect. Holy shit. Can you imagine what that must have felt like for her? Hold on. I'm just got somebody from that part of the world pinging me right now. My phone's been exploding the last 24 hours. Okay, so Okay. Sorry. Um, what that must have felt like. Who is he to say this? I mean, how does Trump know? I'd be very tough for her to be the leader. She doesn't have the support or respect. She's a very nice woman, but she doesn't have the respect. She doesn't. Yeah, he obviously doesn't have any idea what the hell he's talking about there in that situation. But and what that must have felt like is almost unimaginable, especially. But this is what happens. You can't put your hopes in Donald Trump. What happens when you put your hopes in Donald Trump? You end up, God, who's that woman from New York? Uh, Elise Stefanik. Look what happened to Elise Stefanik. Okay. There's a whole fucking long road of people who've put their hope in Donald Trump and been disappointed because it's all about him. It's all about his friends. It's all about his billionaires. Okay. So we're at this press conference. He's talking about that. It's not going to be her. Okay. Well, it's clearly not about democracy because it's not just the situation where you have, let's get through this. Here we are. Okay. It's not just a situation where he's saying that they have no plan and they have no benchmarks and they have no timeline. It's that he's saying she can't be president. She doesn't have the support of the people, which is fundamentally anti-democratic. I mean, there you go right away. If this was a democratic process, if it was about the Venezuelan people, he wouldn't be deciding, playing kingmaker and deciding who can be within and who is without this process for any kind of transition. Well, okay, so then we move along and you're talking about what's the plan going to be? What's next? They don't really have one. And we have right now the architecture of the Maduro regime in power. The vice president is there. The defense minister is there. They're talking. And the closest we come to any process or discussion about what might be in the future for Venezuela is when Marco Rubio basically said, we're going to be watching their behavior or something like that over the next few weeks, which means nothing. Okay. It means nothing. To do this correctly, and by correctly, I'm not saying necessarily legal, but to have some patina of competence and some kind of operational framework, you would have this whole timeline and you would say, this is what's going to happen then. This is what's going to happen here. Here's what's going to happen next. They have none of that. Marco Rubio was shooting from the hip today, like Donald Trump, to talk about and just making shit up as they go along about the future of a nation with the largest oil reserves, 26 million people. That's larger than Germany. So that's where we're at. And then we have Trump saying, he's asked, are you going to have military occupation of this country? He's like, well, yeah. He's like, maybe, but it's going to get paid for by the oil reserves. Okay. I mean, so what you basically have in this situation is Maduro has been taken out. And I said this last night, and I've said this all along, and I've said this about Maduro for months and months and months. Okay. And all of my pretty extensive, focus on this area in this country. Removing Maduro does not fix the country at all. It doesn't put, trash bags, soap, gauze, antibiotics back in the hospitals. It doesn't bring 30,000 doctors back. It doesn't fix the endemic corruption, which is a long-term process, okay? Corruption, as it was used by Russia against Ukraine and also the former Soviet socialist republics, is something that takes years and years and years to get past and, many generations because it is a very effective weapon of oppression. The dehumanization of you can't even get a dentist appointment unless you bribe the guy. You can't get a driver's license unless you pay the person at the driver's license office. That kind of situation takes a lot of focus, a lot of attention, a lot of planning over time, which obviously these are the things that the Trump administration has none of whatsoever. Okay. It's lizard brain, instantaneous, think for a second, move on to however else they can be benefited individually and personally. And so we're going to go there. Trump's going to have his Wall Street friends. This is not me saying, this is what he said. And they're going to, make money off of the country. And this is fucking exactly what they tried to do with Ukraine and the reconstruction. Okay. So there's a lot of symbiosis between, if you look at the different points of Trump's foreign policy, you can kind of see these through lines, and it's all around corruption and it's all around the destruction of American foreign policy and our reputation around the world. So they use military force, grab Maduro to bring him back for prosecution. But as an analog to that, we're only going to have a presence in that country, and our efforts are going to be focused entirely on bringing in foreign investment from the United States, which is foreign, and Donald Trump's friends to make money for the oil companies to get repaid. Okay, so one thing we should, if you think about that compared to Ukraine, and you remember that 28-point plan, that abomination that Kirill Dmitriev and Witkoff and Kushner put together, which was originally written in Russian, apparently. And item 27 of that 28-point plan, as I was trying to shout from the rooftops right before Thanksgiving to anybody who would listen, it appointed Donald Trump, basically, pun intended, as a czar over the reconstruction funds, several $100 billion. It made him, put him in control of that for life. It gave him the power to issue sanctions even after he leaves office. So it created like a quasi-governmental structure for him to grift and impose sanctions power, which usually comes from the organic legal document of a country. Like an executive of a private company can't issue sanctions that are binding against another country that banks and financial systems are forced to comply with. It has to be governmental power that imposes that restriction. Item 27 of this 28-point plan also said Donald Trump gets to decide who is in breach of this agreement, which means he can just hold that sword of Damocles over Ukraine's head, saying, do this, do this, do this, put my friend in power here, pay this person, this company here, make sure that I get a kickback here. Otherwise, I'm going to declare you in breach. And now that you've reduced the size of your army, as earlier in that 28-point plan required of Ukraine, I've reduced it, and now you're going to have to go ahead and turn this situation. I'm going to declare you in breach, and Russia's going to invade again. So everything you did to comply, putting your neck out there, reducing your army, you're about to get screwed. So clearly, it was all about grift. And that's what it's been about even since that, when Europe jumped in and tried to fix that plan, and we've had all these negotiations and back and forth since then. That's what you have now. This is a foreign policy designed to benefit Donald Trump and his friends financially. That's it, and that's all. That's where we're at. This is unprecedented. It is horrific, and where the hell is Congress? They're going to have to exercise oversight. But before we get to sort of these next steps, let's talk about, kind of just put a capstone on this. Now that we've got Trump effectively using our military forces to put his friends in a position and himself to make money off of a country, which is foreign policy. I mean, it's like a foreign policy self-bribe. There's no other way to do it. It is absolutely using the instruments of government for self-enrichment, like openly and directly. What's scary about this press conference is the lack of self-awareness. I mean, everybody should understand that with any sense of history, with any basic understanding of just like life in the world, that when we go after Venezuela, what is the first reflective and instinctive thing people say? Blood for oil. They want the oil. They're going for the resources. I mean, it's so obvious. And to go out in that press conference today and just talk about, well, yeah, they're going to pay for it, blah, blah, blah. To have no self-awareness of this issue, of that this blood for oil and this invasion of trying to take the resources, like that's even an issue. It doesn't even appear to them. Like these people are off, like in a completely different place, totally insulated from reality. It is incredible, just so tone deaf. It's almost unimaginable. But that's where they are. They don't even think it's wrong. They don't care. So, all right, so that's where we're at. Under this plan, you're going to have, because right now we have 15,000 total soldiers in theater. It's obviously not enough for an occupation of a country like this. It's going to be using those soldiers just to protect the facilities and the investment. Clearly, there was a backroom deal of some kind with the current administration in Venezuela to at least allow them at this point in time and for the foreseeable future to stay in power. And they need that stability in order to invest and for these friends of Donald Trump to come in and make money. So what does that mean effectively? Okay. We have troops there to protect foreign investment. We have no plan for transition, no benchmarks, no path forward. we're effectively using our military not only to make Trump money, but to keep the existing power structure in place. Getting rid of Maduro doesn't get rid of everything else. That architecture is there. And whether it's intentional or de facto, we're helping to keep the oppression in place by deciding that Maria Corina Machado, quote, is a very nice woman, but doesn't have the respect of the people. We're keeping the existing power structures in place. Now, that's where we're at. It's not about the people. It's not about Venezuela. It's not about democracy. But let's talk about the damage that this is going to cause for our foreign policy. This is going to haunt us for 30, 40, 50 years. And I also want to put this against the backdrop too of the current disinformation and information warfare environment that we find ourselves in. So when you have this situation, what you can see every time there is an effort at any kind of foreign, even not intervention, our diplomacy in other countries, what did the Soviet Union always say? What did people like Fidel Castro always say? What did people like Hugo Chavez always say? Americans, they talk about, this is what they said. Americans, these Yankees, they talk about democracy, human rights, self-determination and all that. But it's just a cover. It's all BS. And they're all about imperialism and using state-sponsored violence to benefit their corporations to plunder other countries, to plunder these countries. It's not about the good things. That's just a cover. Trump's actions, although those statements were not true at the time, made all of that appear to be true going forward. That is a powerful statement. It is what you're going to hear about everything we ever try to do in the foreign policy and diplomatic arena for decades. And when we have unregulated social media in the United States, I harp on this again and again. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act basically gives social media companies in the United States, not only are they not regulated as to what they actually do, you cannot sue them unless it's for a breach of contract for their breach of their user agreement, okay? Which means the only damages you get are contract damages, which means you just get your whatever monthly amount you may have paid. And if you didn't, then you really get nothing. And you have Russian information warfare. You have Russians right now who are teaching AI chatbots, and they're purposely putting in, using their own algorithms, false information, and literally engaging in this warfare as like a mode of their life against us. They're going to use that. This is just like Venezuela. It's Venezuela all over again. And it makes all the people who did good work, USAID, diplomats, people who've worked, at NGOs, hell, even, churches and religious organizations, missionaries that have done fantastic work all over Central and South America. It makes their work a lie. Look, this right here. Okay, Roberto Clemente. This is a man who's at the height of his career, and there was an earthquake in Central America, and he went to go fly relief supplies down there that he paid for himself because he thought that the government would try to steal it, but if he was there, he was such a public figure that they wouldn't take it, and he died taking relief supplies down there because he didn't care about his career. He wanted to help people. All of these are the kinds of people who get screwed over and made to look like liars by what Donald Trump, this obscenity that he did last night, and which continues. Now, trying to think back, so that's going to make everything difficult, but trying to think back, what is an example of this? I see nothing in the 20th century that is an example of this. This is like Belgian Congo kind of shit. And think about now, replay in your mind all of our interactions with Venezuela. What about the boat strikes? I thought it was about drugs, Donald Trump. I thought it was about the threat that Venezuela poses to our country. Well, if you're keeping the existing power structures in place, it wasn't Maduro putting cocaine on those boats. It wasn't Maduro working in the fields, Okay, it was the whole architecture of this alleged, narco trafficking governmental organization, and we knew it was bullshit because he pardoned the president of Honduras. We knew it was bullshit because a boat with 20,000 pounds of cocaine, he didn't blow that up. He let the Coast Guard seize it. It sure as hell looks like what this was about is coercing Maduro and those around him to give him up so that he could be taken out, so that then the oil executives and Donald Trump's friends could come in and plunder the country and its resources. And in exchange for that, the existing vice president and so forth could stay in power. You know who else does that shit? You know who else in this fucked up world right now? Pardon my language, but this is really irritating for me. You know who else goes to countries that are struggling and suffering in order and says, basically military protection, express, direct, or de facto, as we're going to have in Venezuela, apparently, in exchange for you staying in power? The Russians. This is exactly the shit that they do through Wagner Group in Africa. It's the long history. Where do you think, all this blood diamond stuff and conflict diamonds and conflict mining? Give us the wealth and we'll make sure, and we'll let you stay in place and do whatever the hell you want to do. Again, another way we're acting like the Russians. If in fact democracy was the concern and having a prosperous country rather than a menace that is, intertwined with Russia in our hemisphere, if that was the issue, there would be a plan, there would be a transition process, but there's none of that. All he's done is screw up our foreign policy, made a lie of people who've worked hard in the past, and just you got to think about that going forward. This thing that he says as well, I wanted to kind of get on this too. So that's kind of like where we're at, how things have developed, and the initial harm and damage. When you look at on the screen right now, Peter Baker, this post right here, okay, the U.S. ran a war game during Trump 1.0 to assess what Maduro's fall might unleash. It found that chaos and violence would likely erupt as military units, rival political factions, and even jungle-based guerrilla groups jockeyed for control. Okay. So how is what we're doing making that less likely? It's not. It's making it more likely, of course. And this is something I've been talking about. I've been trying to tell people, we've been talking about, look at FARC in Colombia, look at, the Sandinista rebels in Central America. You have these existing power structures in place. It's just Maduro, the one guy out of like thousands in his regime that is gone. Think about in Iraq. Would we have said that, well, we got rid of Saddam Hussein, but we left Uday and Qusay, absolute lunatic, nut job, rapist, psychopath, mass murdering, just crazy ass people. We left them in place, so it's okay. If we got rid of Hitler, but we left, Himmler or Goebbels in place, we left those guys in place. Would we say that's okay? We got rid of Pol Pot, but we left everybody else in the Khmer Rouge in place. Would we say that's okay? That works? Does that make sense? Probably, of course not. So it makes it more likely that you're going to have these factions fighting it out. And Trump doesn't care because they're there to protect the resources. That's all that really matters at this point. So the likelihood of civil war, which will drive up the refugee problem, the likelihood of infighting between these armed factions, this is a destabilizing event that makes the conditions on the ground more or less likely. So you should look at that. This tweet is spot on, and it's exactly what we did. I also like, just on an emotional level, think about if you're somebody in Central America, somebody in South America. Let's say that against all, some of the historical things that we've done in those areas as a country, that, you're someone who is, let's say you're a Venezuelan, you could consider yourself a patriot, and you've told people over and over again, okay, You've stood up, you believed in America, but like, yeah, I know they say this about, they're just out there for colonialism. They're just here to take our oil. But I believe in them because they always talk about, and you argue with your cousins and your uncles. If you're like someone, you're a Venezuelan and you tell people like, don't listen to what they say about America being evil and being colonialist, we should believe in them. Can you imagine all those people, thousands, millions who followed us, who believed in us? What a bomb went off in their hearts today, and the level of disappointment. That's another thing to think about. And all the Venezuelans who came here under temporary protected status, who have been proven in a court trial earlier in 2025 in federal district court against the Trump administration to have higher levels of employment, lower levels of crime, to pay higher levels of taxes than U.S. citizens. Is Trump going to try to ship all those people back now? And we're going to send all these people back because, well, now we've gotten rid of Maduro, even though they've just made it worse. And the conditions have actually been harmful conditions that caused them to come to this country under TPS have actually been made worse. Again, screwing stuff up, the ripple effects, both in our foreign policy and in the people who are affected there, the fact that our reputation is destroyed, and what goes on in the hearts and minds of people who supported America and what we stand for. I've got an American flag over here sitting next to a Ukrainian flag, and I look at those two things bound together. It's an interesting metaphor in my own mind, but it's, you look at that and you're like, you don't know whether to feel honor for what it should stand for or to feel shame based upon where we're at as a country and how bad this makes us look. Okay, so let's talk about also another thing, the legality of this. You've heard Trump say many, many times that, they stole our oil or they stole from us and did all these things that were bad and wrong. They owe us this. At face value, that's absolutely absurd. Okay, these resources belong to the Venezuelan people, as administered by the government. Okay, I believe first or second largest oil reserves in the world. Now, it is true that Hugo Chavez did nationalize the oil companies, and that there were existing agreements with, they nationalized the oil companies during Hugo Chavez's presidency, and that caused some, breaches of contract and so forth with American oil companies. And there's a couple judgments out there, but this is like between shareholders and oil companies. It's between, private entities, subcontractors, things of that nature. If you look at the overall universe of how American companies were involved in the oil process, refining, extracting, and all of those things, like that whole universe that was basically shut down when the oil companies were nationalized by Chavez, it's like 2 to 3 to 5% of those may have judgments that from a court of competent jurisdiction that they're owed some money. There is no adjudication by any court anywhere at all that Venezuela, the nation, and Venezuela, the people, owe us the oil that's in the ground and the right to just come in using military force, take it, and pull it out of the ground. If we're going to say that the government of Maduro and his regime, because the government is him plus the whole framework underneath him, is illegitimate, and yet we are effectively letting them stay in place, and they're allowing us to take that oil out of the ground without really any protest so far, then we're basically using the existing power structures we criticized in order to get that oil back. Even when you have a judgment, so let's assume there are some judgments, like I said, related to the nationalization of the oil companies by Chavez. You do not collect on a judgment, and I've practiced in 30 plus states, by sending your fucking army to go invade another country and take their resources. It's a very specific process. You get a judgment, you reduce it to a liquidated, not a liquidated, you reduce it to a sum certain. And there is a process for attaching property, the Iranian hostage crisis, 1979, frozen assets that were in financial institutions subject to U.S. control. That was used to satisfy the judgment. That's how people, like it's like foreclosing on, let's say they have equipment, oil drilling equipment or something like that, that happens to be within the United States, or that it can be attached by legal process. That's how you collect on a judgment. And the reason this is important is there's a lot of cases concerning due process, meaning notice, opportunity to be heard, neutral fact finder, and the opportunity to present contrary evidence. Those 3 to 4 elements. There's a lot of due process cases in our constitutional system, in our legal history, that dealt with prejudgment attachment, execution on judgments, how you satisfy a judgment when someone owes you money, what kind of notice is required. And so this is very well settled. So this whole thing about they owed us money or they took oil from our countries is complete BS. And it's just a cover. So that's how that process works, for those of you who may not be aware of it. All right. So I think an interesting question also is, how is this different from the Manuel Noriega situation? And there's an article or something we're going to look at here from the Atlantic that came out today. I think it's an excellent piece. It talks about that. But we need to talk about, before getting to that, because that's focusing kind of like strict legalities, just kind of like the overall diplomatic environment within which this happened. We had no buy-in at all from the neighboring countries, okay, Brazil and Colombia. Now, these nations, which are not wealthy, have absorbed millions of refugees. And I did a video earlier on my YouTube earlier in the year about like the percentage. If you look like in the border areas, like 1 out of every 4 births in Brazil and Colombia are actually refugees from Venezuela. They're the ones that are bearing the brunt of this. We, on the other hand, the Venezuelans who came to the United States under TPS, temporary protected status, they had background checks. They had to go through this entire process. It takes several months. They had to pay a bunch of money to the United States government, and they have work permits, and they work and contribute and pay taxes. So we didn't bear the brunt of anything with respect to that refugee process. We actually, in a way, as a manner of speaking, we benefited from it compared to these other countries that border Venezuela. So typically, like when we went into Grenada or we went into Panama, you get the buy-in of the surrounding countries. You have some international support for what you're doing. When we went into Iraq, we had the first Iraq War, Desert Storm. Obviously, that had UN resolutions. It had most of the world. It's like 80 to 100 countries supporting us. Even Arab countries. But in this situation, we don't have the buy-in of the American public. We don't have the buy-in of Congress. We don't have the buy-in of Colombia. We don't have the buy-in of Brazil. We don't have any mention of what happens with our NATO allies were not involved. And in fact, we've alienated those countries. Why do we alienate Brazil? What happened? The tariffs. Trump said the tariffs were because we have this ridiculous theory that has no basis in fact or logic or common sense, that a trade deficit means that you have is somehow we're being taken advantage of. We had no trade deficit with Brazil, but Trump, by his own admission, his own social media post, imposed a 50% tariff on Brazilian goods to punish them because they actually held Jair Bolsonaro accountable, unlike we do with our judicial system, with our political system in our country. So he basically was using government power to help one of his friends. Now, it backfired. It didn't work. But again, so that's why Brazil's not on our side. Do you see the layering of just awful, horrible shit here? We don't have the neighbor of a country that we're engaging in colonialism against on our side because we imposed 50% tariffs because they dared to hold an insurrectionist president, Jair Bolsonaro, accountable. And then when you look at Colombia, the president of Colombia is very outspoken. Colombia is a longtime ally. If you remember what we did, getting rid of how they struggled so much with Pablo Escobar, Medellin in those days, Colombia, all the cities in that country. I mean, there's like bombing the Supreme Court, killing Supreme Court justices, violence all across the country. And we help them, and they have spilled so much blood when it comes to fighting against actual narcotics trafficking. And it's Gustavo Petro is the current president. Like one of our staunchest allies, consistently over the past several decades, we revoked his diplomatic visa to even come to the United States because he criticized Donald Trump for the boat strikes. And he's a pretty, far left figure. Don't agree with everything he says, but he calls out Trump. He's basically said these are illegal acts. I think he actually called him a pedophile and a murderer, or the country's being run by pedophiles in relation to the Epstein files. But point being, we don't have their buy-in either. This is just fly by night, go it all alone. They did tell the Gang of Eight in Congress, but really nobody else. And what you end up with is they're not aware that this even looks bad. They don't give a shit if it does. And they're going in like the government of America and our military exist solely to benefit Trump and his friends. Screw the public, screw our Congress, screw the world stage, screw all the people, all our diplomats trying to say that we're a credible nation. And that is insane. Here's another thing to think about. What the fuck is the limit? What is the doctrine and the limiting principle here? Can anybody explain to me what the limiting principle might be? Okay, so when do we not go into a country to take its resources? How, in the future, with respect to other countries, how is this going to be different? How can we identify the conditions beforehand where we won't go do this? With respect to that, I don't even know what the doctrine is here, but I don't see any limiting principle whatsoever. It seems to just be unchecked power. And wherever there's money to be made based upon the suffering of people in other countries, they can step in. And why does this matter? Think about Greenland, which belongs to Denmark under their legal agreements. And that's a NATO ally. And why does that matter? Well, did you see what Katie Miller posted today? Look at this psycho bullshit. Greenland do you think, what is this even, what do you even say? Soon, she says. This is an explicit threat to go invade a NATO ally. This is the situation we're at. Congress, what the fuck are you doing? It costs money to have troops stationed in this area. It costs money to have a carrier strike force group sitting in the Caribbean. It costs $30,000 an hour to fly a fighter jet, especially more if it's stealth, especially more if you're in a humid environment. A single one per hour. To operate a supercarrier, I think it's from like $30,000 an hour. Okay, it's $8 million a fucking day. Where's that money going to come from? Congress has to appropriate it. Congress has to control it. I've talked earlier about the War Powers Act stuff. So let's look at that. Okay. This is a really good website. It's the War Powers. It's law and security. So if you go to the 48-hour report database. Okay. So on September 4th, 2025, Donald Trump provided, under the War Powers Act, there has to be a notice within 48 hours. God, the screen is so bright. I don't know, it won't go into dark mode. It's like, shh. You have to provide notice to Congress within 48 hours of using military force. Okay. So what did Trump say about this? This is when they struck a boat. This is the very first one in the Caribbean. On September 4th, 2025, for some reason it says, "Dear Mr. President." I don't know why in the White House. This is supposed to be to Congress, be that as it may, to have a typo, typical Trump, on a major document like this. "I write to apprise you of the military action taken on September 2nd, 2025 in the Caribbean Sea and the potential for further such actions. Extraordinarily violent drug trafficking cartels that the United States have designated as DTOs, blah, 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 devastating consequences, blah, 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 friendly foreign nations have made an effort to combat this." It's really just like I said in my Substack article, the way that Trump does his foreign policy is, it's basically like jargon plus my Article 2 unrestricted power as the president. My power as a president is whatever I say it is, even if it violates statutes, even if the power I'm exercising belongs to Congress, as it does to deal with rebellion and insurrection under the Insurrection Rebellion Clause of the Constitution, to put National Guard in the cities. Even if it's illegal, it doesn't matter. I'm the president, and then I'm going to throw a bunch of jargon at it, and that's the theory of presidential power. Nothing more elegant than that. That's how Donald Trump operates. So that's what we have here: jargon and bullshit, blah, 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 blah. In the face of the inability and unwillingness of some states, they do the whole national self-defense. Here we go. Right here. We now reach a critical point. We must meet this threat to our own citizens. Our most vital national interest with the United States military force in self-defense. National self-defense is what Trump said justified killing all those people across the Caribbean, meaning we were faced with an imminent threat of an armed attack. So, by his own admission, the War Powers Act applied to those actions. It applied to blowing up one boat. Later, he said it didn't. But that was September 2nd. So what do we have? We're well past the 60 days at this point. And Congress is basically doing nothing. This is because of the Republicans. The Democrats have written letters as they do. We really can't do a whole lot else, it doesn't seem like. Maybe hold up nominations, maybe try to be a pain in the ass on other stuff. We're well beyond blowing up a single boat. We have invaded another country. We're talking about putting troops there. Who's going to pay for it? I thought we pretended to care about deficits and all these other things. But again, we're way past that. Now you look at what you're talking about here with Trump. Again, okay, so this is the next thing. When we talk about the limiting principle, look at Cuba. The people of Cuba have suffered for many years, and it's a badly failing nation that will likely be talking about. So we have this unrestricted doctrine. We have what we're going to be doing against other countries, apparently. We're going to have an occupation force just to help Trump's friends make money. And the grift has already started. Polymarket, the ones that make bets on how many, what civilians are going to die where in Ukraine right now. Apparently we have insider trading based upon Trump's invasion. So yesterday at some point, $30,000 bet was placed. This shit should be illegal, but it's not under Trump, of course. Somebody placed a $30,000 bet that Trump would invade and attack Venezuela. And then they made $408,000. Can you imagine? Can you imagine sitting there in a Blackhawk or a Chinook and you're about to fast rope in with night vision? Night vision has a 40-degree field of view. If you have quad tubes, it's more, but those weigh 27 plus ounces. So even units that can get access to that technology may not want to use it. Just say you have $10,000, $15,000 decent dual tubes, 40 to 50 degree rather than 180 field of view. And you've got body armor on, you've got your weapon, and you're flying in, about to fast rope down into an unknown situation. You're a Delta Force operator. You have worked your ass off your entire life to be a tier 1, best of the best in the entire world. You practice constantly. You practice this operation in a building that reflects the architecture of this, which you're about to raid, 100, 150, 200 times, again and again and again. You've played it out in your head for 3-4 months. You've been thinking about it. And all of your life and all of your hard work culminates to this moment. And you're about to fast rope in. And people die all the time fast roping in. A FBI hostage rescue team member died about a year ago. It's dangerous no matter how safe you try to make it. Blades overhead, moonlight coming down. And some sideways asshole in Palm Beach who's never fought for this country, he's never served in the military, he's never done anything except to enrich himself. Some asshole with soft hands is sitting in Palm Beach and he's gambling on the risks you're taking. You could end up in a wheelchair. You could end up fucking blind. Okay. You think about all the injuries. You try not to think about it as a soldier, but I've been in that position. And you just try to put it out of your mind, but you could end up with no arms, right? And all the risk that you took is for some asshole to do insider trading based upon your risk, your life, your honor, your integrity, your hard work, your love for country. I just wanted to point that out because it made me fucking sick. That grift has already started and it's only going to get worse. That's how we started out. We started out with that grift, okay? We started out this campaign, mass murdering civilians all across the Caribbean. And we have an administration that doesn't even know that this is inappropriate or wrong in any way whatsoever. Now, looking at Cuba, Rubio says it's run by incompetent, senile men. He said this with Dimension Dawn. Okay, again, do I like Cuba? No, I don't. But is there just going to be like a wrecking ball and just go all across the world and just do what is the limiting principle? How is this not might is right? How is this not Belgian Congo? How is this not going to be everything that we have constructed in the wake of World War II and forward? Where does that come from? Rules-based order? A war of aggression comes from that concept, comes from the Nuremberg principles after the Nuremberg trial, okay? And what we established with the United States and with the rest of the civilized world, okay, in Europe, is that a war of aggression and the UN Charter, so you must respect the sovereignty of nations and work through a legal process. And there's ways in which you can self-defense, if the legitimate government calls you in to protect, if it's necessary to protect, hostages or something like that. There's lots of ways you can use force, but it has to be pristine and it has to follow certain legal pathways, because a war of aggression is the umbrella term for the worst kind of war crime that exists in our legal system and international law in the UN Charter, because that's the umbrella under which you have crimes against humanity, genocide, all the other war crimes that can happen. And so this here today, last night, deconstructed all of that. Somebody posted today, who was it? I think it was Ian Brimmer. He said, the law of the jungle, when you start it, it applies to everyone. And that's what we have. That's what our allies, I believe a diplomat from Denmark also said that. It's the law of the jungle now. Threatening Greenland by itself? You think about, man, let's say you're Taiwan and you're arguing against Chinese imperialism or an attack. So put yourself in the position of Taiwan and try to make the reasons why, try to construct an argument as someone from Taiwan as to why Trump, under this, whatever this doctrine is, this framework and this talk we've seen over the last 24 hours, why China invading violates what Trump said, and try to find a way within which China can't fit an invasion of you and taking of your resources. And it's not oil there. It's going to be semiconductors. Why China is not going to be able to invade you based upon this Trump doctrine, whatever the hell it is. Can you make, I can't make an argument. They could say, well, Taiwan is a destabilizing force in our region. They engage in economic warfare and they owe us money. They stole from us. The simple thing, Trump, they stole from us when there's no judgment to that effect by any competent court, with no due process, no law, no justification, no authority from Congress. They stole from us. Sounds like something Russia would say, something China would say. It's just rapacious greed, endless. Now, Cuba, we're going to go screw around with Cuba. Okay. I mean, again, we could probably end up doing that successfully from a military perspective, but what happens next? Canada? Did Canada steal from us? Trump, I'm sure at some point he's accused them of that. Economic warfare. We have the trade deficit. Canada's stolen from us. Greenland, they've stolen from us. NATO, they don't pay enough. They've stolen from us. And this isn't for the people. It isn't for the soldiers. It is for Trump and a little small amount of people around him who have paid him bribes, buying his crypto, whatever it may be. All right. So, it's interesting too. I want you to think about the colonialism. This is exactly what we have with respect to what Trump has laid out today in Venezuela, and compare that to there's a parallel between colonialism externally in invading Venezuela and a form of colonialism or economic exploitation at home with oligarchs, artificial intelligence, unregulated social media companies, and what these companies want to do. Okay, so as we're treating Venezuela with respect to their oil, so Trump is allowing all the tech oligarchs with government backing and funding to do to the American people and our economy as a resource, to put all these people out of business, to get paid for, with economic exploitation, and with no path forward in case there are broad societal harms that come from what they're going to be doing with artificial intelligence, social media, and everything else. There's exploitation with colonialism, exploitation at home, different resources, different geographic location, but same method, same means, same avenues, and same victims. The common person, totally screwed. And I think that's just an interesting component to think about. Now, how does this affect Ukraine? There's two ways. One potentially good, one potentially very awful. One way it could affect Ukraine is positively. Let's look at the ways. Good news first, bad news last. It could affect Ukraine positively if, Trump wanted to make money off the Ukraine reconstruction. Now, if you assume that he only wanted one grift and not just every avenue he could possibly find, you could say that as an item, as in the 28-point peace plan, and as in we saw in later reporting by the Wall Street Journal, where this is about a month ago, not a month ago, it's probably about 2 weeks ago, where he said basically, where it was revealed at least by sources, which I by my reading, or within European intelligence agencies and diplomatic people, is that Trump was trying to convince the Europeans, contrary to their public criticism of the Europeans about buying Russian oil, that they want him to buy more Russian oil so that they could engage in a business for peace transaction with the Russians, where they would make money off of Ukraine reconstruction, off doing business with Russia. Obviously, that's a dead end with Russia, but because of the legal environment of that country. And all the frozen Russian funds. Remember, going back to the 28-point plan, item 27 was Trump gets to take, he gets to be the czar over all reconstruction funds, and has the ability to declare Ukraine in breach, allowing Russia to invade again. And that's a huge lever of power to have over the Ukrainians' heads. Earlier in the agreement, it said that Ukraine had to pay for its security guarantees. Every Tomahawk missile fired, which they don't even control, they could just waste them on purpose to get more money out of Ukraine. Security guarantees had to be paid for by Ukraine, and security guarantees had to be paid for by Ukraine, even though 50% of the reconstruction profit or revenue has to get kicked back to the United States. So it's like double dipping plus holding a sword over their head with respect to declaring a breach. Just a complete bribe city. And one positive thing you could say potentially about this situation in Venezuela is, look, Trump has found another avenue of corruption. Okay. Rather than dicking around with some the future reconstruction and the Russians who you're the worst people on earth to negotiate with and are going to breach everything. And it's kind of uncertain and a lot of uproar. And you have people in Ukraine and the government and their supporters all around the world, and in the ones that remain in Congress, and in Europe, being very prickly and defensive and protective of the Ukrainian people. That's a tough situation to really push that through and make money for long term. Instead, let's go invade somebody close to home who has these huge oil reserves. And in fact, when I talk about the tie between colonialism in Venezuela and economic exploitation at home by the tech oligarchs, think about this: using Venezuelan oil to pay for their fucking data centers. See, it's all a symbiotic connection together. Metaphor tied together. But if Trump is distracted and says, we can use this money in this grift in Venezuela, we don't need to dick around with this complex, money-making efforts to make money off the Ukraine reconstruction. Okay, great. Now he's over here. It's easier, and not over there. And it's an easier process. Bring the oil executives in, blah, 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 blah. There you go. So maybe if his focus is off making money in Ukraine, it makes that process easier. Now, that assumes that Trump only wants to make money off one thing and not both, and not everywhere he can. Another way it could be helpful is if the oil production and refining capacity increases the supply of oil. This is what the Russians think. They think it's going to be, keeping them going no higher than $50 a barrel. And Russia is very sensitive to fluctuations in the oil prices. And according to an intelligence assessment in that Wall Street Journal article I just talked about, the Russian economy has actually been in free fall and recession for at least the past 6 months. Okay, so that's one way that could help Ukraine. Alternative source of revenue and grit for Trump, also harming the whole oil prices and revenue for the Russians. But there's some reporting that another way this could be really negative for the Ukrainians is that there's some reporting and with some sourcing that Ukraine, Russia, and Putin and Trump made a deal to swap Ukraine for Venezuela. Let Russia do what it wants in Ukraine, and Putin won't really fight back, and let Trump do what he wants in his area, the spheres of influence theory. And that there's been an actual agreement on a swap like that. If that's true, and again, I don't know that is, that would be horrible and really bad for Ukraine. So I think fundamentally, at a minimum, even putting those two things aside, the legal environment that has been created is something that is very difficult. We're talking about wars of aggression. Now, we didn't send cruise missiles into a children's hospital on purpose for 300 plus days, 3+ years, not 900+ days. So we haven't done that. We're not yet that much like the Russians. However, like again, the doctrine and the precedent that Trump has set. Take the precedent Trump has set with this action in Venezuela, and then going and engaging in just flat out colonialism. Apply that to all of the aggressive countries on this planet, and tell me how it restricts their behavior in their expansionist, imperialistic goals. I see no restriction. Let me go to, let's look at, I just want to go to that reporting real quick on, let me see here. All right. So some questions to consider if Trump plus Putin traded Venezuela for Ukraine as suspected. Putin will, these are some things to think about. And again, I always try to keep an open mind and not like be critical of people, even though if some of it is far-fetched, because I could have never imagined. I mean, I just didn't think that Trump would actually try to engage in this blatant, clear colonialism, but I underestimated. And it's incredible how someone who is as cynical and horrible as Donald Trump, you can still fail to imagine how bad he would be. The reason I didn't imagine he would do what happened today at the press conference, because it's so politically stupid and tone deaf, and suicidal, but he did it. So some of these items in here are not things that I think are like are possible, or are very remote possibilities, but it's interesting. Number one, will Putin try to capture Zelensky now? They've tried repeatedly, but never with the benefit of U.S. intel. Again, I think that's unlikely, but was the 2020 Venezuela election interference narrative planted in order to seed public support for U.S. expansionism in the Western Hemisphere? Will Trump pursue Cuba or Greenland next? That is, how quickly will they try to manifest the Donroe Doctrine? Now, this is what they called it today, which is basically, I guess, if you want to put an itemized list of what is the doctrine, it's hard to even put into words, that if you indict a foreign president, a foreign head of state, then you can militarily invade that country, take over militarily invade the country, capture and abduct the foreign leader and arrest him, bring him back, not even extradite, because that's a legal process, that you can go in and basically render this person back to your country to be prosecuted. And if you think that they have stolen from you, as loosely fucking defined as humanly imaginable, and even in the metaphorical sense, you can go in and take their resources. Okay? That's the Donroe Doctrine, I guess. Will Trump try to use the Venezuela oil production capacity to force low oil prices? Was Xi, the Chinese head of state, a party to a deal that gives him the option to move against Taiwan at the time of his choosing? Again, I'm not sure, but it's still, some of these seem a little bit remote, but things to consider. And this is what I was talking about. The one way this could be very bad for Ukraine. There's lots of reporting on there being a potential deal to swap Ukraine for Venezuela. Now, okay, so like legality, and comparing this to the Manuel Noriega situation. So that's what I wanted to jump on this article with you guys that Jonathan Lemire addressed. And let me see here. If you guys are sending me questions in the chat, I'll have this the next time I stream, that'll have like a better way for me to see those questions as they happen, so I can respond. Because if I look at if I pull this up now, it's like a delay and it's super distracting. Let me see here. This the next time I stream, that'll have like a better way for me to see those questions. So as they happen, so I can respond. All right. Because so let's look at this article in the Atlantic. This is very interesting, and the messiness of a post-Maduro world. Trump's apparent, God, this is so bright. Let's sit back for a little bit. Trump's apparent violation of international law will almost certainly go unpunished, but the rules and norms will be missed. Okay. The most memorable moment in the president of Maduro, goes on. Okay. Here we go. But again, Maduro being arrested is a victory. of sorts for the Venezuelan people. But like I said yesterday, like I've been saying for months, getting rid of Maduro is the easiest part, and that alone doesn't do jack shit for the Venezuelan people. It could potentially make it worse and more unstable. At this morning's press conference, Trump said the operation was about Maduro's violation of the core principles of American foreign policy. American foreign policy is whatever the fuck Trump says it is, and that's not international law, and that's not how we're supposed to operate as a country. I mean, like international law, there's standards, there's the UN charters, things we've agreed to. Like the UN is like terrible and incompetent in some ways, like putting Iran on the Human Rights like Council. But fundamentally, like these basic concepts of like rules-based order, we don't invade each other, and we learned our lesson with 60 million dead in World War II. That shit actually has permanence and does matter and is fundamental to, you know, the structure of the international world. Violation of the core principles of American foreign policy, number one. His defiance of American dominance in the Western Hemisphere. Again, to me, that's like fucking feudalism right there. Okay. Did Ukraine violate Russian dominance in their hemisphere? If that's enough to trigger an invasion, then we're just all bets are off. I mean, Trump is creating a world in which if you found a time machine, you're going to like, and you could only go from the like 10 years into the future or like 100 years into the past. You're definitely going to go back to the past, back like before they had vaccines, because the future is so insane and dangerous. Hosting foreign adversaries. Maduro is an ally of Cuba, Russia, and Iran. Okay. And his alleged flooding of the United States with drugs. Okay, so he violated the core principles of American foreign policy. He hosted foreign adversaries, and he flooded the United States with drugs. Again, the first two are just completely made up, and it's whatever somebody wants to call it, and solely within the control of a head of state, of a leader of an aggressive country. And the last one, flooding the United States with drugs. Again, those are voluntarily purchased by Americans, and almost none of the drugs that come into America come from Venezuela. Trump did not mention Venezuela's opposition politicians, the legitimate winners of the 2024 election, by name. He said the United States intended to govern Venezuela. We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. Transition to what? The Associated Press wrote the understatement of characters breaking news that the legal implications of Maduro's arrest were not immediately clear. I gotta deal. This is so fucking bright. It's like making my head hurt. The Associated Press, okay, the operation is less to a challenge of law than an instance of total disregard for it. It is an indulgence in precisely the behavior that international law theoretically constrains, namely the crossing of borders with the use of force to meddle in what could be considered another country's internal affairs. All right, so comparing Maduro's arrest to Noriega, this is important. In 1989, we went in and took Noriega to be convicted of drug trafficking and other crimes. The justification for that action was threefold, okay? Panama had allegedly self-defense. Again, Trump also said national self-defense with respect to, which is a concept of international law, but is also used to justify the use of, that is used to justify the use of military force that Trump, as we saw, put into his war powers declaration within 48 hours after striking that first boat on September 2nd of 2025. Okay, so we're the same there in a small respect. But Panama had allegedly declared a state of war against the United States. Dumb move. And killed a Marine there. Okay, so Venezuela never did that. The American treaty with Panama, which authorized the United States to protect the Panama Canal. Huge legal difference between this and Venezuela. Because we built the Panama Canal. A lot of people died doing that. Incredible cost, time, effort, money. And we had a treaty about that, which was ratified by the Senate. You know, again, totally different situation, 180 degrees from what we have in Venezuela. And finally, authority granted by the exiled legitimate government of Panama, which Noriega refused to govern. Okay, so let's compare that to the shit that happened in Venezuela now and what is declared to be going to happen in the future. Okay, we talked about there's no treaty. Trump does invoke something like self-defense based on a dead Marine, not a dead Marine or declaring war, but on thousands of tons of cocaine up the nose of innocent Americans. Calling this, and I dealt with this in my Substack article about whether our actions in the Caribbean constitute terrorism under 18 U.S.C. 22331. It's not an armed attack, which is what triggers self-defense, unless it is the widespread and pervasive use of kinetic weapons, and even more, even if soldiers die, like a skirmish with other soldiers, that's not enough. Okay, so a voluntary business transaction, buying drugs from drug addicts, doesn't satisfy that. This part, taking part in this of sending thousands of tons of activity, it's an armed attack, is a tantamount to an armed attack. It's a stretch. Again, think about the guy, the president of Honduras, former president of Honduras, 400 or 500 tons of cocaine. Complete BS. Every justification that Trump gives for anything, you can find some pardon or some corrupt shit that he did that absolutely blows it out of the water and proves it to be a complete fraud and a lie. The Trump administration does not invoke the authority of Venezuela's opposition, which won the 2024 election, had Maduro counted the votes. And he absolutely did steal that. I mean, that is well documented. So the things we have, again, sorry, I'm super tired of being up all last night, but try to be as concise. 3 justifications for taking Noriega, okay, in 1989. Number 1, we had a treaty. Number 2, he declared war in the U.S. and actually killed a Marine. And number 3, the legitimate government of Panama requested our assistance. And that is mostly, there's some validity to that, okay? We have none of those 3 here. In fact, I would call that a blunder. I mean, I'm sure, like, if Maria Corina Machado was willing to say, and this is a fucking lie, okay? I mean, it's a lie, but she's desperate to help her people, I guess. That Maduro interfered in the 2020 election to help get Biden elected. If she's willing to say that, I'm quite sure that they could get her to ask for a United States military intervention. But the fact they didn't do that, I mean, that if they were thinking about it and planning well and had people who were competent, like, they totally could have tried to muddy the waters with that, but they didn't. It's just pure stupidity, self-inflicted. It's like punching yourself in the groin again and again. Okay, so this shows you that what happened in Panama is totally different from what happened here. And in part because they just failed to make the case. And they don't care. And this goes on and on. All right, so there you go. So nothing like Noriega. Now, just going back to, because I had talked about this last night, but had not, was a little bit fuzzy on some of the numbers. These are the coup attempts. The failed coup attempts since the coup attempts from 1958 until the present, or changes in the head of state through violence and other than elections. 1958, there was a successful coup, overthrew Marcos Perez Jimenez. There was an attempted military uprising in 1961, another one in 1962, another one in 1962. Those all failed. Hugo Chavez, 1992, failed coup attempt. 1992, second coup attempt against Carlos Andrés Perez, that failed. And then there was one in 2002, sponsored by the United States, that failed. Okay, so and again, the guy we put in immediately abolished the Supreme Court and the legislature. It was worse. He was only in for 48 hours. Okay, it was Pedro Carmona, April 11th, 1992. All right, so Okay. Dissolve the National Assembly, dissolve the Supreme Court. This fucking guy was on a roll. This is all like immediately. Dude was only in power for 48 hours. Violated the 1990 Constitution, suspended the Constitution. All right. Suspended the Attorney General, Comptroller General, governors, and elected mayors, and formed a transitional council of his friends. It sounds like Donald Trump, honestly, like spirit animals. Okay. So like there's a history, there's some kernel of fact. And that's like if you understand Russian disinformation, what they do is or information warfare is there can be some small kernel of truth and then they take that and they call it information laundering, similar to money laundering. There's 3 steps, but a lot of different techniques. And they take some truth and they wrap it up in a bunch of bullshit. And then they launder it through a bunch of shell entities and different organizations that they create or control. And then ultimately it ends up sort of like being reported in mainstream media. And that's sort of how it's similar to money laundering is it's information that's been washed and now it's out because it's been regurgitated so many times. It's kind of gone around the world a couple times. And it starts off like on Telegram, then it ends up getting, CNN or somebody reports on it, just like the phenomenon of something and it's taken as true. And there is a kernel of truth that like we have some, like that was wrong and undemocratic because Chavez was validly elected in that country. Whatever you think about him, it was internationally monitored elections. Okay. Later on, he created an environment that had less guardrails and made it so he didn't actually steal ballots like Maduro did, but created the conditions where it became harder for others to. I believe he overtook the national TV station and things like that. But that was wrong. That's a kernel of truth. And that alone has that's made our foreign policy difficult. Look at the imperialist 1990 United States, 2002, not that long ago in terms of, history. They interfered and had a coup attempt on a validly elected leader in Venezuela. They also, there's some other stuff Chavez wanted to do to give low interest loans to other poor countries like Haiti in the Caribbean. And oil executives from Texaco were against that. And we tried to pressure them. Ultimately, that deal went through. So, but the point being, we don't just have a kernel of truth. We don't have like a little piece of something that needs to be wrapped up in a bunch of effort. Like there's no fucking effort that's required for this Russian disinformation. Like just take Donald Trump in his own words. Like you don't need to put any shine or polish on that shit. Okay. At Trump at that press conference today. Let's go through some of his worst things that he said today. Aaron Rupar. Okay. All right. Okay. I mean, the lack of self-awareness is unbelievable. Okay. Just, God. Okay. So let's just go through Aaron's double A run. All right. Okay. Will U.S. troops be on the ground? Well, we're not afraid of boots on the ground if we can do it. Okay. Except on Maduro. He effed around and he found out. Oh, this is something I wanted to talk about. We'll get to this in a second. Maria Machado doesn't have the respect of the people. Okay. We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. What does that mean? Run the country? Do you know how many Spanish-speaking people, which I'm sure Trump, there's probably not a whole lot of those people in the administration since USAID and a lot of the State Department got shut down, and since they're racist and they just got a bunch of white nationalist fucking incels in the government. Imagine what it would take to run the Venezuelan government. 26 million people, bigger than Germany, I believe even bigger than Texas. I don't want to go run that country. We can't even run our own country. We have not passed a fucking balanced budget in the United States since the year like 2001. What? I mean, like, look at our national debt. Shit, we might make it worse. The reason why, I mean, honestly, like, that's not even a stretch. The reason why we can run up these debts is because the dollar is the world's reserve currency. If the dollar wasn't the world's reserve currency, we might be like Venezuela, okay? That's just some shit we lucked into. Like people who get to be, born in America instead of Sudan, whose parents end up being, in this country rather than, being the wrong religion or, happen to have been born in Eastern Ukraine where they get attacked all the time by the Russians and invaded constantly for centuries and genocided over and over again. Anyways, so that's a vague statement. Run what? And at such time we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. Okay, transition to what? What are the parameters? What is the goal? How do you measure success? They don't fucking know. They have no clue. No idea whatsoever. Look at that. We are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. That is an invitation. It is like completely unrestricted, shoot from the hip, no definition, international law, whatever is that. Throw it out the window. I mean, that could end up so fucking bad, so terrible, so unrestrained. Okay. This is one sentence, guys. One sentence that this person said today. Let's go on to the next one. We're going to have our very large United States oil companies go in, spend billions of dollars. Okay, I guarantee you, nothing an oil company does is for free. When they say spend, they mean with an expectation of reaping far more profits in return and spending money so they can then make money, stealing the blood of the blood and soul out of the ground, literally, that belongs to the Venezuelan people, and making loans that are leveraged and going to be paid back by the Venezuelan government, like I said, like the Russians do in Africa, like Wagner Group does in Africa. Give me your resources. I'll make sure you'll stay in power. Not a whole lot of difference here. Who's going to say no to the United States there? Who's going to say no to that? Who's going to stop us? When I say us, I mean them. I don't mean me as an American. Fix the badly broken infrastructure and start making money for the country. And we're ready to stage a second and much larger attack if we need to do so. Oh my fucking God. Look at this. And we are ready to stage a second and much larger attack if we need to do so. I got to hear this.
The oil infrastructure.
Let's just listen.
And start making money for the country.
Oh my God, he's reading from a piece of paper.
Ready to stage a second and much larger attack if we need to do so. So we were prepared to do a second wave if we needed to do so.
Wow. I don't listen to Donald Trump much. He sounds like really bad there. Okay. I'm not going to listen to this. Okay, so this Big Oil spent millions and millions of dollars to get Trump elected. We know that. That's absolutely a fact. Okay. And, Trump, his fascination with the wind farms and closing down all the green energy. You do realize we're going to run out of oil by like 2050. Kind of need to get ahead of that. Everything is about going backwards in time. All right. So, a member of Congress found out from his wife by watching it on TV. Look at GOP Representative Pat Harrigan. These people, these enablers are the worst. I'd rather just like a straight up like in your face asshole, like fuck you, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, blah blah blah. I'm gonna be straight up about it. Like I don't respect that, but like at least it's straight up. Oh, here's this fucking guy, Carlos Jimenez. I'm sorry, I gotta talk some shit real quick. This guy, every one of these people. So, anyways, we've gone through all the crazy shit he said at the press conference. That's enough of that about that. This guy. Okay. I mean, 2 hours ago, this fucking clown said, "Thank you, President Trump. Our community is forever grateful for your leadership, resolve, and decisive action." Like, and you've got some other politicians like this in Florida. Like, he's taking over your country, keeping the bad people and helping keeping them in power with the American military, to literally Belgian Congo your ass in that country, and you're thanking him. God, look at these. Maria Elvira Salazar. She's another one. Proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with my congressional colleagues. Maybe they're, I don't know, like how you can stand there after what Trump said and say that. Oh, it's just. He says he supports, Carlos Jimenez said he supports the president's actions in Venezuela, believes the next step must be a peaceful democratic transition, not a chaos or another dictatorship. But that's exactly what's happening. And he told you right to your face, you idiot. That's 8 hours ago. And then 2 hours ago, he's saying he stands shoulder to shoulder with President Trump. There you go. Okay. He said something last night. All right. So. Reza Pahlavi, my thoughts. This is the son, I believe, of the Iranian Shah who was deposed in 1979. My thoughts are with my friends Maria Corina Machado, president-elect, and Edmundo Gutierrez, and the brave people of Venezuela, who, like my own countrymen, blah 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 blah. So, a lot of people came out in support of Machado, and Trump completely pushed her away. Like, you don't count. I decide that your people don't support you. This is who we are. Okay, I was going to find this like completely ridiculous, obscene thing he said. Oh, God. Yeah. Thank you, President Trump, 16 hours ago, for changing the course of history in our hemisphere. May God bless our brave service members, and we are safer because of President Trump leadership, resolve, and willingness to confront evil. He's confronting himself. I mean, he treats him as, this is the guy, look at this. This is the guy who is a member of the Armed Services Committee. This is the oversight. This is the oversight you can expect from our Congress. This is insanity. Oh, God. We're going to run the country right, Mr. said as he turned to oil. It's going to make a lot of money. No shit. Okay, so Pete Hegseth in his hubris. He said he effed around and found out, and there's all this bravado. There's a lot of things I don't know in this life, and a lot of things I don't know about history. I'm just a dude. But I know one thing. Hubris like that, arrogance like that, is the poison of empires. And it is the seed of our future regret being planted. The lack of humility whatsoever after these same people spent all this time attacking the neocons. J.D. Vance, where are you at, dude? Hey, J.D. Vance, I thought no more stupid foreign wars, bro. I thought you came from Appalachia. You know, hillbilly elegy. But you selling out. The same kind of person that somebody from a poor part of the country, racked by the opioid crisis. You went into the Marines, and yet you are the same kind of person that is going to be taken advantage of and thrust into an occupation role in Venezuela as the remnants of the regime in a part of the world that has a history of rebel groups and infighting and civil wars that stretch for decades. that's where you're going to, that's what the person you were and the life you lived and the thing you criticized is what you have now, what you've become to benefit the billionaires, the oil executives, the oil companies. And Pete Hegseth sitting there like, oh, he have to run and found out. I mean, again, same thing. Always criticizing the useless foreign wars. But like, what are they doing now? And when I see that, and you see that Trump and all these people are just totally insulated from reality and just like stepping on fucking rakes left and right and not even knowing that they're stepping on rakes. Okay. That's the crazy shit. It's like, is that guy on fucking PCP? He just got hit in the face with a rake and he didn't even move and he just kept walking. The fact they don't know that, the fact that there's this far out over like on the edge of the plank in shark-infested waters of reality, life, and consequences below them, and they don't know that, that is scary to me. They don't even realize like how bad what they're doing is, and they think they know everything. That is so unbelievably dangerous, and it's one of those things that if something really horrific happens in our upcoming history, that books and and historians and academics will look back on and say that was the point right then. Look at how far they came out, and they will marvel at how insane that state of mind was. Super tired because this war had been up a lot, so it's hard to think of like historical and parallels. But you remember before World War I, they thought it'd be over quickly. World War I had days where there was more casualties in a day than there were in all of Vietnam. The Civil War in the United States, 700,000 dead. It was like 3% of the population. Mississippi had half of its state budget in 1866 spent, or a third of its budget spent on prosthetic limbs. 700,000 dead, far more wounded. Thought that was going to be quick. Lots of hubris in that situation. Before Pearl Harbor, the Japanese are not going to make it all the way over to us. The development of the nuclear weapon, the Russians won't get one. We'll be greeted as liberators. There's another one. Take that and magnify and multiply. That's what you got. Yeah. All right. So, there's something else I wanted to talk about. So I'm about to jump off this, but, kind of covered these main points. Super dangerous, super scary. And, but there's somebody else important to me and also in our history who also talked about colonialism and the dangers of it and how it's contrary to our values. I'm just going to leave you with that. Just give me 1 minute. All right, so let me just read you some of this and I'll tell you who it's from. It's just incredible. It deals with colonialism, and it deals with the hubris of our government in another time. Okay. It almost makes you emotional. And I have found myself in full accord when I read these opening lines. A time comes when silence is betrayal. And the time has come for us in relation to Vietnam. The truth of these words is beyond doubt, but the mission by which they call us is a most difficult one. Even when faced by the demands of inner truth, men do not easily assume the task of opposing their government's policy, especially in a time of war. Nor does the human spirit move without great difficulty against the apathy of conformist thought in one's own bosom and surrounding world. Moreover, when the issues at hand seem as perplexing as they often do in the case of this dreadful conflict, we are always on the verge of being mesmerized by uncertainty, but we must move on. And some of us who have already begun to break the silence of the night have found that the calling to speak is often a vocation of agony, but we must speak. We must speak with the humility that is appropriate to our limited vision, but we must speak. And we must rejoice as well, for surely this is the first time in our nation's history that a large group of our leaders have moved beyond prophesizing about the smooth patriotism to the high grounds of firm dissent based upon the mandates and conscious and reading of our history. Perhaps a new spirit is rising among us. Let us trace the movements and pray that our own inner being may be sensitive to this guidance. We are deeply in need of a new way to move beyond the darkness that seems so close around us. It should be incandescently clear that no one who has any concern for the integrity and life of America today can ignore the present war or the use of violence in that pursuit. If America's soul becomes totally poisoned, part of the autopsy must read colonialism and war. Somehow this madness must cease. We must stop now. I speak as a child of God and brother to the suffering poor of the world. I speak for those whose land is being laid waste, whose homes are being destroyed, whose culture is being subverted. I speak for the poor of America who are paying double the price of smashed hope and the death of corruption in this war. So think about the soldiers who are going to have to go fight to make Donald Trump's friends money. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. A true revolution of values will look uneasily on the glaring contrast between poverty and wealth. With righteous indignation, it will look upon the seas and see individual capitalists of the West investing huge sums of money in Asia, Africa, and South America, only to take the profits out with no concern for the social betterment of those countries. And we will look upon this and we will say in this revolution of values, this is not just. It will look at our alliance with the landed gentry and the governments of South America that exploit their people and say, this is not just. The Western arrogance, the American arrogance, a feeling that has everything to teach others and nothing to learn, is not just. A true revolution of values will lay hand on the world order and say of war, the way of settling differences is not just. The business of burning human beings with napalm, of filling our nation's homes with orphans and widows, again, we're putting people at war who are not going to benefit from it. Instead, those people that he's talking about in America, the children made orphans, that fucker from Poly Market who did insider trading, gambling on the invasion, making money from Palm Beach, $500,000 nearly, 8 years of a soldier's salary or more. Those people are making money off the people he's talking about. Injecting poisonous drugs of hate into the veins of peoples normally inhumane, of sending men home from dark and bloody battlefields, physically handicapped and psychologically deranged, cannot be reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. And this is like another quote that kind of echoes with me a lot in these times. Like, it's not just the fact that we're invading another country and engaging in colonialism, and it's not just the fact that I've talked to you earlier in the stream about all those people, whether it's Machado, whether it's the opposition, or whether, like, most poignant to me is the individuals who stood up for America at their family gatherings, who taught their children that America stands for something great and try to get there. And those people whose hearts that Donald Trump broke all across South America and especially in Venezuela is very sad to me. It's sad for us. It's sad as I look at that American flag over there in my room, in this room. It's sad as I think about the future people who are going to suffer because it made our ability to engage in diplomacy and positive action throughout the world so much more difficult. What Donald Trump did goes back through time to invalidate what people like Roberto Clemente did. It goes back to invalidate all of the hard work in the Cold War, and it goes into the present, and then it goes into the future. This is a ricochet back and forth across the sands of time in the most like poisonous and destructive way imaginable. Listen to this. These are revolutionary times. All over the globe, men are revolting against old systems of exploitation and oppression. And out of the wounds of a frail world, new systems of justice and equality are being born. The shirtless and barefoot people of the land are rising up as never before. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light. We in the West must support these revolutions. But what did Donald Trump do? He exploited those people. He exploited the revolutionary spirit. He exploited Venezuela. All right, so this talking about colonialism, this talking about our obligation to help revolutions in other countries, this obligation to see us as threaded together as one common humanity. Our only hope today lies in our ability to recapture the revolutionary spirit and go out into a sometimes hostile world, declaring eternal hostility to poverty, racism, and militarism. This powerful commitment, we shall boldly challenge the status quo and unjust mores, and thereby speed up the day when every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill shall be made low, and the crooked places shall be made plain. Every nation must now develop an overriding loyalty, not to money, as Trump is doing, but to mankind as a whole in order to preserve the best in their individual societies. This worldwide fellowship that lifts neighborly concern beyond one's tribe, race, class, and nation is in reality a call for an all-embracing, unconditional love for all of mankind. So this, talking about Vietnam, these words, these fundamental truths, these obligations to help others in other places, to support revolutions of people seeing the shirtless and barefoot people of the world have now seen a great light. If we will make the right choice, we will be able to speed up the day all over America and all over the world when justice will roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. So all of this stuff that I just told you about, that's Martin Luther King. That's Martin Luther King speaking about Vietnam. Those words against colonialism and against everything that's happened, what we've seen over the last 24 hours, the damage that was done the damage that we will carry on after Donald Trump is long gone, after this stupid MAGA movement is defeated, that we will be paying the price for. In 20 years, when there's some blatant aggression by a truly hostile regime, maybe Russia, China, whoever it may be, and we're trying to call them out, and what will they say? Remember Venezuela? Remember what Trump did there? See, Americans are just colonialists. And it's going to be spread across the internet, and it's going to be laundered through disinformation networks, and it's going to be spit out by AI. And some person who had nothing to do with this is going to have to carry that weight, and people are going to be hurt because of this. So this destroys the current situation. It creates a framework for aggression right now and going forward. It makes lies of the past, creates wreckage into the future. That is the full precept and like understanding and the texture of what Donald Trump has done. So that's all I got. I'll be streaming. I sent it out on a tweet, I believe, 3 p.m. Eastern. So every weekday, because this is going to be rapidly developing. You know, I mean, look at these people right here. Look at these people and their hopes. The shirtless and barefoot people of the world have seen a great light. We in the West must support these revolutions, a true revolution of values. You know, and then this is what those people think, that Donald Trump cares about them, or they hope, or they wish. What a betrayal. Anyways, stay hopeful, pick up the pieces. Love you guys. So I'll be streaming every weekday. It's on my timeline, I believe, 3 p.m. Eastern. This is going to be rapidly developing. I've been all over this Venezuela stuff for a long time. I thought this was going to happen. Everybody called me crazy. Never underestimate how bad Donald Trump is. And I guess that's it. I'll talk to you guys later. Have a good one.